I've been with SPH for just over a year now, and prior to this, I've spent the majority of my career building AI and data teams in a multitude of verticals. So in some sense, you could call me a bit of an outsider to the news and media industry. And I think that fresh perspective is essential as we start using more and more data within the newsrooms. So let's kick in and dive in. A brief overview of who we are. A lot of you who are aware of Singapore Press Holdings might associate us primarily with our flagship publication, which is the Straits Times. But we do have 8 daily newspapers, and our Chinese media group and our Business Times offerings, as well as our Berita Harian and Tamil Merasu offerings, are actually widely read within Singapore. I think the takeaway from this particular slide is that we are a rather multifaceted organization. I think Sandra alluded to the fact that when you have different markets, the audience responds very differently. Well, when you have different audiences with different languages and different needs and wants from each of these publications, each of whom have their own identity, well, you're looking at a relatively complex set of balls to juggle. And we don't do just print and digital media. We also have radio stations in Singapore, and we have a plethora of digital websites, apps, and magazines that we operate. What that translates to is that we end up with about 3.75 or 4 million monthly unique users and about 500 million page views across our platforms. So what I'll do next is I'll walk you through how we're looking at data within SPH and how it's organized. As is common among many media organizations, we do have 2 primary revenue models, both advertising and our circulation arms, and we have our various newsrooms. What the data teams within SPH try and do is we build the dashboards, we try and productionize any data models or AI models that need to be there. We try and run with a few insight pieces when we need to, and we also try and craft a sane data technology roadmap. And the fabric that stitches all of this through is all the hardworking busy bees in the middle here. So we have a central analytics and data science team and a governance team, and then we kind of technology organization to provide us with engineering resources and help implement some of our vision statements that we need to do. We also have a fantastic product management outfit, and I think a special shout out to organizations, which is that having a high quality product management or product managers in your team, in your organization is an absolute boon. Because what they will do is they will try and translate an idea to an execution, and they interface very closely with the data team in general. And what they will try and do is craft the ideal way and the velocity with which you want to manage your myriad wants and asks. Okay, so that's the introductory slides, and perhaps as we reach the end of this talk, we'll do a brief review and see how they contribute. I wanted to take a little bit of a different tack to this talk, which is that and I intentionally labeled the title as what's data got to do with it. And when you think about building a data-centric organization, I'd argue that being data-centric or data-informed in and of itself isn't really of that much value. Don't do it unless you know what you want out of it. And this is where I think a lot of time doesn't get spent, and perhaps it should. And we start with 3 basic questions, which is, what form would success look like? If you're a newsroom that's struggling to transition from a print to a digital savvy audience, you might find that your page views are declining, your content goes out of date too quickly, your platforms, perhaps has a high bounce rate. Those are different problems. If you're looking at the fact that, we'd like to augment our advertising revenue while keeping a sane content stream without compromising any element of our journalistic integrity and coverage, well, that's a different playbook as well. The second question, which is also important to ask, is when would you like to do this by, or do you have concrete timelines and milestones? I think that question is a bit easier for many organizations today because we are facing, in some degree, relatively universal milestone timelines where we need to fix parts of our core technology stack. And I'm referring obviously to the third-party cookie. And when you're faced with that kind of timeline, things get easier. When you're doing things on a BAU basis, that's when this question becomes a bit tricky. So what happens if I don't achieve my outlined vision of success in 6 months, 12 months, 18, 24? What happens, right? And this exercise has to begin and be completed to some degree before you really truly can expect success from data. And as I always jest to the management, well, we've probably got 999 problems. Data is one of them, yeah. So if you're looking at a silver bullet, it isn't data. So the rest of this talk, right, and I'll walk through 5 pillars that we've tried to approach this transformation exercise within SPH for. And as I go through it, I'll try and speak both from a data-centric or a data person perspective, as well as perhaps as you're engaging with your data teams, what to look for. So the first pillar and the most important one is cultural. And from that perspective, it's about getting comfortable with the tools. Sandra mentioned that there is she spoke about in-house wikis, and she spoke about the fact that there's in-house training programs. That's absolutely essential. We do that at SPH as well. And the idea is that if you'd like to do something with data, don't be intimidated by it. Know what's in the organization and how you can leverage it. It needn't be the full gamut. We try and tailor this. We have beginner, intermediate, and advanced training courses, and we expose these to the entire organization, and we seek nominations from the various business fields to send their staff. For the data team itself, we have our own, as we onboard new data analysts, engineers, and scientists, we send them off on a 1 or 2 week onboarding course to bring them up to speed with all the technology that we're using. The second piece is when you're talking about what value does data add to your day-to-day operations? I think that's important to get right. And my perspective is that asking and answering the right questions is important. Too much data is overwhelming. The whole point isn't to add cruft to a tremendously hectic news life cycle. And even these sales teams and our circulation teams are working and running at 100 miles an hour. So adding a huge amount of overhead in terms of looking at 15 to 16 different dashboards and metrics before you're even able to arrive at a narrative is probably not going to get you the transformation that you need. My advice to organizations who are building data analysts and scientists within in-house is to prioritize their ability to communicate and align first. Because once you have both the newsrooms, the business units, and the data teams speaking the same language, you'll find that a lot of issues get resolved before they need to be escalated. The third thing about culture is psychological safety. I think this one, and it's not unique to news organizations. I think this is a core tenet of pretty much any functional organization, and it's the ability to speak a truth without having to worry about, the emotional and the political fallout of that. What we try and do at SPH is to try and provide numbers without commentary, and we align with business stakeholders prior to sharing these and say, well, do you agree that these are the numbers that make sense to look at? Oh, here you go. This is what the numbers look like. The data looks like. If we need to have a conversation, let's do it offline. The second pillar that we're looking at is technological. Well, there's three elements here. The first is pick tech that's ready to use for your organization. So don't invest or purchase tools just because the ecosystem is investing in it if you don't have the ability to really find a a decision or an outcome attached to it. And because what you will find is that, most organizations have a lengthy RFP process, and you will just incur additional overhead and a bit of wastage if you're looking at tools and tech that just isn't doing it for you. The second part of this pillar is think about data as a service here. It's very quickly, when there's a bit of momentum and excitement about using data, you'll find that translates very quickly into a vast variety of requests. And even after you kind of do a bit of filtering, you may find that you're getting overwhelmed, and the ability to hire and productionize your insights in a scalable manner isn't easy to do. So think about it from the get-go and manage your expectations across the board. So what I like to do is try and say, well, if you, for data and analytics perspective, what I try and do is, well, if you have this dashboard, walk me through what decisions you're making using it. And if the answer, let's be honest, sometimes the answer is, well, actually, I don't really, if I didn't have access to this dashboard, it wouldn't change my decision, or I wouldn't really stop, it wouldn't prevent the decision. Hey, then it's not an essential piece, right? So that's a very good filter to get out of, and kind of brings you back to the cultural piece as well. So let's start with using data where we do make a decision, and then we can figure out whether we need to expand the scope of decisions that we're making. The third piece technologically is to make sure you've got a good data governance platform in place. I say this, having seen orgs built from the ground up as tech organizations and organizations like SPH, where we have had multiple transformations and multiple technology stacks, things get messy very quickly, even in the best of times. So without the ability to manage your data democratization, your lineage and your governance, you will end up with silos, you will end up with frustrated stakeholders who will then go out and do their own thing because you need to still move on. And that's just gonna harm you long term. So try, if you can, invest in your data governance platforms as soon as possible, if you haven't already. The third pillar is about partnerships. And this is where we look at it both from an internal and external perspective. So internally, make sure that you're aligned, especially in an organization like SPH, where you've got multiple newsrooms who use a variety of different workflows and tooling. Enable that connection from a data perspective. So if you're using an A/B testing platform in this business unit, is it fit for purpose across the organization? If not, what's the misalignment and how do we do that? The outward-facing piece is equally critical, and it's a different paradigm altogether. This is where, when you're looking about investing in data technology and skills, how do you want to contribute to the ecosystem and basically look at which tools and which communities that you are not engaging with that you would benefit from. The second part is about assistance as well, where as you're ramping things up and you're moving at 100 miles an hour, don't be afraid to seek aid in areas within your organization that you lack expertise in. One of our newsrooms is actually very proficient with working using our online collaboration platform. And what we found is that that's the function of the fact that they often get banned by a particular entity. So which means they have to get very crafty and creative with working on the go. And what we found is when sometimes our systems go down, our CMS systems and some of the other backbones suffer, well, sharing these kind of workflows helps a lot. The second part of that assistance is, and I was debating because I've said don't fall into the trap of building everything internally, which is true. Yeah, I'd argue that the exact opposite is also equally valuable. Don't fall into the trap of building everything externally. So the challenge with vendorizing every aspect of your tech stack is that usually they're not tailored to you. So again, my advice on the approach we're taking is to figure out which parts of the technology stack are absolutely essential. We have the expertise to build internally and maintain. Start there, and the rest of it we will look at engaging external assistance. Fourth pillar is prioritization. Pick and choose. You're not going to be able to do everything you want. This is if I had to leave folks with one advice, this would be it. So manage your expectations. Honestly, ask yourself the question: if I didn't have this, how would life change? You'll find that once you're getting used to using tools that you actually value, making incremental improvements becomes much easier and faster. It also helps your technology and data teams produce the outcomes that are of high quality. Because the reality is that if you're doing everything, then everything's going to suffer, because you're spreading the butter really, really thin. The fifth pillar that we are trying to incorporate is adopt an iterative mindset. So the news cycle it's a cycle, right? So from a technology and data perspective, though, when you're looking at things, it's not done and dusted when it's out. This is true for any organization that engages with a digital audience. Your customers change, their preferences change, their mindsets change, the content you're producing evokes a different response in them. So from that perspective, when you have implemented a solution or you've gotten a data or AI model out in production, think about how you would revisit that periodically. Set that in stone. So make sure that you don't take implementations for granted. We're done. Dust your hands and move on. The second part of that is about timelines. Now, when it comes to a lot of the digital native organizations out there, startups, e-commerce platforms, they have a culture. It's inculcated from the get-go that we're not going to achieve perfection in our first cut. So what we'll try and do is we'll launch a feature, quickly evaluate whether it's working, and then improve it further. That's a very valuable mindset. An actionable piece of advice I'd give is pick a factor that you'd like to limit based on. So hypothetically, it could be, I'd like to spend at most 6 months on a particular feature before I evaluate. In some organizations, it could be, I want to spend, as much as 2 people. Yeah. So make sure that you have that time box. Okay. Before I move on, to my final few slides, I wanted to do an interlude, which is that everything's, wonderful in theory, but usually the first, when you're putting these things in action, they will rarely pan out the way that you planned. About a decade ago, for a telco rollout in a large region, we were investigating how to put more voluminous 4G towers. And we tried to do a partnership with a local police agency which owned the infrastructure for the traffic lights. So we thought we'd put 4G towers on top of the traffic lights. And in return, we'd have to give them CCTVs to monitor crime. Well, it didn't work out because it turns out that vagrants got wind of it and they had hit gangs going around throwing stones at webcams, which meant we then need to do a bit of analysis on how to put webcams at a higher altitude such that people couldn't throw stones. And of course, then we found out that we needed HD cameras, which made the price point for that particular initiative good. So again, all your plans, mice and men, think about the real issues on the ground as you're approaching your implementation. Okay, so what happens when it works? Well, when it works, life is beautiful. We've got subscription and churn propensity modeling out on SPH. We've engaged in a customer lifetime value model, which we use to try and drive our subscription arms. We have centralized all of our reach metrics for the organization, so we all agree that a page view is a page view is a page view across mobile, country, publication. We're building internal first-party audiences, and we're getting good at A/B testing support. So good, fantastic. Well, when it doesn't work, what happens when it doesn't work? Well, the less is more narrative, right? We've tried approaches where people are given access to dashboards that they want to build themselves, and a lot of them have low usage, right? We've had experiments for certain features a few years ago, we didn't pan out, and there isn't sometimes a mindset of, well, we did this before, it didn't work, so let's not look at it again. And there's where we kind of have to have that iterative mindset saying, well, that particular incarnation of the thing you tried didn't work out. What's changed? Right? And finally, please, this is a common trap. From a data perspective, don't do this. Don't go and ask your stakeholders, please, pretty please, would you not use this amazing thing that we built from scratch, asking no one, right? So these are, so I'll kind of leave, I'll end this talk with some data. It would be remiss of me not to include data in a data-centric slide. So perhaps to encapsulate the points I've been making, I think the truly cunning among you will realize that this number by itself doesn't really tell you much. And I think that's probably what I'd like to leave you with, which is that data without context, without an aim, without any outcome in mind is really not of much value. So prioritize, know why you're using data, and hey, wish you all the best.